implementation. My name is Melissa Anderson, and I'm an ADA Program Analyst from FHWA Office of Civil Rights, and I'll be facilitating today's session. So this is our fourth webinar in a series of 5 to commemorate the 30th anniversary of the passage of the ADA. This webinar series will highlight the best practices and innovative approaches being used by state DOTs to implement their ADA transition plans. Today you will hear from Anna Mariotti from the Colorado Department of Transportation and Michael Denblaker and Anna Schrader from the Arizona Department of Transportation. Today's focus will explore the latest innovative approaches to transition plan implementation, and in this webinar we will hear examples of dedicated ADA funding. To start us out, we are honored to have Cheryl Walker, Federal Highways Associate Administrator for Safety, as our keynote speaker. Cheryl Walker became the Associate Administrator for Safety in August of 2019. In this capacity, she provides executive leadership and direction with respect to programs and policies to reduce fatalities and serious injuries on the nation's 4 million miles of public roads. Prior to her current position, Cheryl served as FHWA's Director of the Office of Legislative Affairs and Policy Communications, and in other positions within the Office of the Chief Counsel and the Office of the Administrator. Prior to joining USDOT, Cheryl was an energy regulatory attorney at a Washington, D.C. law firm. Before attending law school, she worked as an electrical engineer for General Motors Corporation. So please welcome Cheryl Walker. Okay, Cheryl.
Great. Thank you, Nancy, and thank you, Melissa. And thank all of you for being here today. As Melissa noted, I'm Cheryl Walker. I'm the Associate Administrator for Safety at FHWA. It is my pleasure to welcome everyone to this webinar and to celebrate the 30th anniversary of the Americans with Disabilities Act. This landmark legislation has helped increase access for people with disabilities in many areas, including transportation. The Federal Highway Administration's Office of Civil Rights is hosting 5 webinars to mark this 30th anniversary, and today we all are here attending the 4th of these 5 webinars. Today's is focused on the importance of dedicated ADA funding. In my office, the Office of Safety, we know there is a clear intersection between safety and the Americans with Disabilities Act. So the intersection I'm talking about is not a crosswalk or roadways or ramps. Instead, our common intersection is our focus on people. This is an intersection we all take to heart. We work closely with our stakeholders to deploy life-saving countermeasures and innovations. But how do we do that? One important element is funding. So at Federal Highway, the Highway Safety Improvement Program, or HSIP for short, is our core federal aid program that provides funding to the states with the purpose of reducing traffic fatalities and serious injuries on all of our public roads across the nation. So I just want to give you a sense of scale. In 2018, the states obligated about $4.5 billion in these HSIP funds for over 4,700 highway safety improvement projects. So as you can imagine, these HSIP projects come in all shapes and sizes. Some of these projects are much bigger in scope than others, and others may come in small increments and include smaller countermeasure installations across multiple sites. So all of these safety projects must comply with the ADA. For each of these projects where we advance safety, we are also improving accessibility. So this means detectable warnings, curb ramps, level sidewalks, curb cuts, and accessible pedestrian signals to help individuals with disabilities. When we make these changes, these also help the dad pushing his child in a stroller up the curb ramp, and children and well-seasoned adults will know when they can or cannot walk across a roadway. In addition to improving accessibility with safety programs, the reverse is also true. Many entities will dedicate funding for standalone accessibility projects, and these projects also enhance safety. As we celebrate this historic piece of legislation, I am so proud to work in an office and an agency where safety is our top priority, with our agency delivering safety funding that improves accessibility and benefits all users. As I mentioned earlier, these are not just road users. We are talking about people with different levels of ability and differing needs, all of whom deserve safe trips on our roadways. So with that, I want to thank all of you again for participating today. Thank you.
Thank you, Cheryl. Before we get started with our presenters, we're going to have a quick poll question. So our first poll question is just to try to get a sense of our audience. So if you could enter what type of agency you represent, we would appreciate it. And we'll give it just a couple minutes. So it looks like we have a lot of state DOT people with us, and you're kind of our target audience, so thank you for joining us. So let's move on to our first speaker. Our first speaker, our first panelist, is Anna Mariotti. So Anna has over 10 years of experience working with civil rights programs at the Colorado Department of Transportation. Prior to that, she received her bachelor's degree in business administration, as well as her master's in business administration from the Seattle Pacific University, and worked in private sector focused on civil rights program administration for 5 years. Anna currently manages the Title VI and ADA Title II non-discrimination programs for CDOT, as well as program delivery civil rights compliance for professional services and construction contracts. So please welcome Anna Mariotti. Anna?
Thank you, Melissa. A pleasure to be here and very excited to be providing this information and speaking with everyone here. So thank you so much for having me. Today we're going to talk a little bit about the Colorado DOT dedicated ADA funding. And really what that is funding that's been established to assist us in facilitating a 5-year ADA program. So we'll start with a little bit of background. So in 2013, CDOT hired interns to conduct an initial inventory of barriers. What they were able to determine was that CDOT had 20,000 existing curb ramps. Each of those ramps had 20 to 40 data points or fields. We also identified over 1,500 locations where ramps did not exist but should have, for a total of over 22,000 total areas to be evaluated to determine if improvements or upgrades were required or needed. We also evaluated pedestrian push buttons, and we inventoried over 14,000 PPBs and utilized 7 key factors to evaluate each of those assets. So for us, that was a lot of initial information. When you're talking about 22,000 ramps with up to 40 data points per ramp, depending on ramp type, and then you layer on pedestrian push buttons. So one of the first things that we needed to do was figure out how we were going to organize and prioritize the information within our inventory. And so some of the steps that we took to establish our program was, again, organizing it. What do we have? And a key element of that was looking at geographic distribution. So what do we have and where is it? And then we looked at establishing functionally accessible criteria. And we'll get into that a little bit in a couple of slides here. But really what we looked at is what is needed for a ramp to be traversable, for someone to get to and through it. And we typically talk about ADAG standards, ProAg standards, but for us, this other bucket of functionally accessible really helps us understand where our traversable ramps were. It also allows us to take a worst first approach and look at curb ramps that are not functioning as accessible ramps. And then the third thing was really determining curb ramps to be addressed in regular project delivery versus in the curb ramp program. So the first thing we did was look at the geographic distribution of curb ramps. So as you can see, this is a map of the state of Colorado. We are divided into 5 regions. So we have a headquarters office, and then we have regions, and our region staff is responsible for administering projects. But we also want to make sure that we are a central support system at our headquarters office for the regional offices. And if you look at it, Region 1 is the smallest geographic area, but it has the Denver metro area in it. And so it actually contains the highest number of curb ramps. At 40% of our ramps were in that area. Our regions 2 and 3 were fairly similar in distribution at 14 and 15%. Region 4 had 26% in that northeast corner. And then Region 5 in the southwest had 5%. And that's a fairly rural area, but it has extremely mountainous terrain. So understanding where our assets were, our next step was looking at how do we know when a ramp is traversable? We have all of this information, but really, how do we know if someone can get to and through a curb ramp? And so what we did is we had several public involvement meetings, and we felt like that was a critical area of support to really engage and interact with the public. So we held meetings in various locations throughout the state in person. We also utilized those meetings to get feedback to say, what is essential? What is something that you need to be able to get to and through a curb ramp? And when we were able to develop that criteria, we received a letter of support on the approach from our Colorado Advisory Council for Persons with Disabilities, which helped us understand that we were on the right path. So the criteria that we identified for our term functionally accessible is really a running slope of 8.33% or less, cross slope of 2% or equal to street or highway grade, curb ramp width of 48 inches or greater, curb ramp joints and grade breaks are flush, turning space requirement of 48 by 48 inches, and clear space requirement of 48 by 48 inches fully outside of active traffic lanes. And so here's a diagram of that where we were really able to pin down this 6 elements really allow us to traverse a curb ramp and give us a baseline to look at a worst first approach, where if a ramp does not meet this criteria, then it's definitely something that we need to prioritize. So some of the differences with functional accessibility and PROAG. So CDOT adopted PROAG standards for new construction in September of 2016. For us, having a ramp that's functionally accessible does not mean that that curb ramp is fully compliant with all PROAG technical requirements. And CDOT does still address all feasible PROAG requirements when upgrading curb ramps, but it really allows us another tool to assist with prioritizing. When we looked at those criteria, those 6 criteria with functional accessibility, what we were able to find from our 2013 inventory is that we had 13% of our ramps were meeting that criteria, which meant 87% weren't. One thing that we looked at is the geographic distribution of that percentage. And what it seemed to us was that it was fairly consistent throughout all of the regions. So we didn't find one region had an extremely high percentage while another region had an extremely low percentage. It really was fairly consistent, that 13% across the board, which gave us a good foundation and a good baseline understanding of our asset. The next step is really looking at integrating with regular project delivery. So we had an asset inventory, we had some definitions and requirements we were looking at, geographic distribution, where are our assets, starting to look at prioritization, and then really, what is our approach? How are we going to start addressing this? And that led to the development of our curb ramp program. One of the first steps that we did is we worked with our project management office, and we were able to overlay our 4-year regular project delivery plan with our inventory and determine which ramps would be scheduled to be addressed through regular project delivery over the next 4 years. And so it gave us at least a sense of which ramps would be addressed and then where the gap is. And that's where the ADA curb ramp program would come into play. So regular project delivery would have potentially increased the number of functionally accessible curb ramps to 8,000, which is about 43%. Now that is a significant increase from 13%, but for CDOT, we still felt like that was a large gap. And if you look at the graphic here, you can tell where the dotted area are the ramps that would have been addressed through regular project delivery, and that fully colored in black area is really the gaps that we're hoping to address through our program. And this is just another graphic that really demonstrates the total number of ramps in each region, the ADA program ramps is that middle column, and the project ramps at the end for each region. And it was also critical for us to ensure that regular project delivery still addressed curb ramps within their project, as they already had funding identified for that. It was part of regular project delivery, and really the program was aimed at the gap and getting the remainder, that 57% that we weren't going to be able to get through regular project delivery. Now, some of the criteria here, when we look at regular project delivery and our curb ramp upgrades, what's required is for those ramps to be fully compliant with current CDOT engineering standards and PROAG technical requirements. If our engineering staff is unable to achieve that, then what we do is we receive a curb ramp variant support document, and we're able to store that document so that we have record of decisions that were made and why they were made, which has been extremely helpful. Now, the ADA curb ramp program is slightly different, and the target there is to have the ramps be fully compliant with current CDOT engineering standards and PROAG technical requirements. But we also allow for a minimum. And so the minimum with our curb ramp program projects is to attain that functional accessibility with a return date for full compliance. If constraints are observed, then we improve to the maximum extent feasible or practicable, and they submit a curb ramp variant support document, again, so that we have that document and we have it filed and stored away if needed. A lot of the decisions are made at the regional level, as they're responsible for project administration. And they're looking at a cost benefit analysis, and some of the elements that they take into consideration when they're designing these programs are amount of time to procure right away, any clearance delays that they may hit, historic, environmental. They're also looking at cost, as well as the next time the ramp is scheduled to be addressed within regular project delivery. So that may impact whether or not they look at functional accessibility as a criteria or PROAG technical requirements. Some of the price estimates that we received as we started to establish this program and it took shape were $5,000 to $9,500 per curb ramp. So we were able to coordinate with some internal departments, determine price estimates, and in looking at the percentages and the data and information that we had, we actually found that a potential price range for addressing that gap would be 57 to 108 million. Our next step was to gain buy-in and really make sure that we had support from leadership. And when we say leadership, we mean the entire chain of leadership. So from our chief engineer to our executive director to the governor. And so being able to share this information and this approach to get their support was critical. One of the main ways that we did that was really to raise awareness to them of the larger issue of ADA noncompliance and the status of our assets through the inventory, and also looked at potential for legal action. So we were able to review previous legal actions taken against other state agencies, other public entities, and we also educated them on the current laws and regulations, and really focused on a desire for CDOT to create a program that worked proactively versus reactively. And typically in the legal actions, what you see is a reactive approach where there's a legal action taken and there's a judgment, and the DOT or other agency has to then react to that. And sometimes they're told the way that they will prioritize and do upgrades. For CDOT, it was critical to be able to take a proactive approach and really establish a funding stream that would allow the agency to utilize public involvement to develop a prioritization strategy that made sense for the agency. We also found that collaboration is key. And so the support from internal executive leadership was absolutely important. And the approach at that time was to set up an aggressive program and to really say, what is an amount of funding and a timeline that could be set up that would be almost difficult to undo. So at one point we looked at, is it a 15-year program? Is it a 20-year program? Is it a 5-year program? So what's the right longevity there? And our leadership at the time really supported the idea of, I want to be aggressive. I want to create a 5-year program with a high level of funding that if there is a change in administration or leadership, that it would almost be more difficult to walk the program backwards than to continue through it. And I think that strategy was really important for us to know that we had that high level of support and a desire to make a large impact quickly. We also had a lot of intra-agency coordination. As you all know, it definitely takes a large group of people to deliver these programs. So some of the areas we were able to coordinate with were our engineering department at our headquarters, as well as our regional level, civil rights office, asset management, bike and pedestrian unit, standards and specs, project management office, division of transportation development, looking at planning. And so it was really important for us to make this an agency effort, not just a single work unit. So for us, what's critical in making the case for funding, and the advice I would give to anyone, is really looking at the asset inventory that leads to prioritization and then developing a cost estimate, knowing it really is an estimate. It's an approximation, and we'll go into some details on that in a future slide of what we've actually found based on that cost estimate from a few years ago. But collaboration is absolutely key in getting leadership on board and really getting that buy-in from the top. So the Colorado Transportation Commission did approve an initial 5-year implementation of the curb ramp program with $85 million in dedicated funding in 2017. Now, some of the key elements that led to that at the time were the economic conditions. So the Colorado Transportation Commission had access to contingency funds at that time. The request was made in 2016, 2017. And again, the request was intentionally aggressive. So it would be difficult to move backwards if there was a shift in leadership. I'm happy to say that since the inception of the program, CDOT has seen a new governor, a new executive director, chief engineer, as well as several commissioners. I believe half of our commissioners have been appointed after the inception of this. But to date, our new leadership has continued to be extremely supportive of the initiative and the program. And that has also been really exciting for us to see that continued level of support. When we looked at funds distribution, one of the things that we looked at was the percentage of ramps, so the geographic distribution, and really our funding ended up mirroring that very similarly. So if a region had a percentage of ramps, they were going to get a similar percentage of funding. And the only area that differed slightly was in Region 5, where they have the smallest number of curb ramps, but they also have an extremely mountainous terrain. And what we have found is that curb ramps can often cost more in that region based on that. And so there was a slightly higher amount of funding given to Region 5. These are some of our findings to date. So this identifies some of the potential concerns that we have run up against. So the cost per ramp has increased significantly. So what we have seen is it really is an average of $10,000 to $15,000 per curb ramp, and versus that $5,000 to $9,500, which is a significant increase. And some of that is due to economic conditions, but a lot of what we have seen is it's the increased scrutiny of inspections. So now contractors are aware that a CDOT staff member is going to be coming on site, and they are going to be coming on site with a level and a tape measurer and a data collection app. And they are going to be verifying all of those elements. And so what that has led to is the contractor understanding that higher level of scrutiny and really increasing pricing based on that. Now, This is going to require CDOT to develop an additional funding approach in fiscal year 23, as the cost will likely exceed $85 million. And then the next step for us is looking at the other accessibility features within the state. So then it's looking at funding for sidewalks, pedestrian push buttons. And so we know that this is an incredible step in the right direction, but we're definitely not done, and we're still working to continue to improve those other assets as well. We also had some lessons learned with data. We had our original inventory was collected in 2013, and it was very much in a spreadsheet format. Now, we've worked on getting a data collection application pushed out and started to get data through that application. And what we found was that our two data schemas were not able to create a consolidated report. So that led to a little bit of an issue where we were not able to report as easily the progress that we were making. And so over the last year, we've worked very hard to get some quality assurance and quality control of the data, create a consolidated single database, which will ease reporting, creating dashboards, making it much easier for our planners and our region staff to be able to package projects and put them together. But it required our Civil Rights Office to take a more direct role in data management and oversight for the program, which is definitely a resource, but a resource well used and well needed. And it's been a very positive experience for us to take on that role. Some of the benefits that we've seen with the dedicated funding is flexibility is probably the key benefit. So the dedicated funding has allowed CDOT flexibility and approach. So we're able to focus on a worst first approach by curb ramp. We are able to tailor our project limits. We can tailor project limits by curb ramp, which allows us for flexibility in timing if there are delays with right-of-way, historic, environmental. So if we end up having a delay with a single curb ramp, we're able to still continue, and the entire project is not stalled, which has led to accelerated progress for our public citizens. And we've been able to address many more curb ramps than through regular project delivery alone. It also has allowed CDOT to determine the best approach with public involvement rather than a settlement or legal action. Some other potential opportunities that we are finding is we did pilot a new accelerated right-of-way approach. And that allows for an exhibit in place of right-of-way plans and survey. And our pilot program saw reduced acquisition time of 1.5 to 3 months instead of 9 to 16 months, which you may see in a traditional right-of-way process. So these resulted in reduced cost to the department, particularly related to the right-of-way acquisition process. We're also in the process of moving forward with a $10 million design build contract, and are excited to evaluate the benefits of alternative delivery as a platform for ADA programs with program projects with dedicated funding. And if there are benefits observed there, it may be a contract delivery method that we utilize in other areas of the state. So it's definitely been exciting for us. We love having the support of leadership. We've made a lot of headway, and much more headway than we would have through regular project delivery alone. But as I said, we're definitely in the middle of a journey, and we are not to the end of that yet. So we look forward to continuing to analyze the program, make enhancements, and improve. So thank you so much for listening to the presentation today. I very much appreciate being able to give this information and looking forward to questions. I will also say, if you're unable to get a question answered in this format, I saw some questions on the side about varying forms, things like that. Feel free to reach out to me. This is my contact information.
Thank you, Anna. That was a great presentation. Very informative. So we're going to have a second poll question, and then we have a question for you. And participants, please feel free to add your questions to the chat. So our second poll question is, does your agency have dedicated or standalone funding to support ADA-related projects or maintenance efforts? And if so, feel free to provide a brief description in the chat pod. Okay, now it looks like a slim majority have dedicated funding, and that's a really helpful way to get things done. So Anna, we have a question for you. I saw a couple of questions come through about the estimate for curb ramps, and I know you started out with $5 to $9.5 or $9,500,000 per curb ramp. And as you went along, the bump the estimates up to $10,000 to $15,000. Can you tell us if that included the design and temporary traffic control, right-of-way, and the other parts of the project that aren't associated with the building materials?
Yes, it did, and it was a comprehensive price that we're stating there. But it also is, it's an approximation and it's an estimate. So what we have found is the more ramps that we're able to package together, we will typically see an economies of scale pricing, especially in our areas that are not as mountainous in terrain and are more flat. Sometimes we'll see reduced pricing there. But in like region 3 and region 5 are kind of our western slope, more mountainous, we do see higher costs there. And some of that is navigating the terrain. And so we've seen, a ramp may cost 20 to 25,000, but some of that is looking at, holistically, did we get a large package of 200 ramps in a small area where we owned the right of way and there were some cost reductions there. We were able to design in-house, things like that. So the 10 to 15 is very much, it's all in, but it's an average. And so we've seen it be less than that, and we've seen it be more than that. But I would say that that's probably the best approximate estimate program.
Okay, thank you, Anna. That was really helpful. I know people were interested in that. So our next presentation is going to be from Michael Dendlaker and Lucy Schrader. And Michael serves as the state roadway engineer and manages the roadway engineering group for the Arizona Department of Transportation. In his role since 2017, he is responsible for the development, design, and delivery of roadway projects that comply with state and federal design guidelines and regulations. Prior to this position, Mr. Dendlaker served as a design engineer, project manager, and also managed the department's engineering consultant section, which is responsible for the administration of the department's consultant procurement process and contracts. Michael Dendlaker is a registered professional engineer in the state of Arizona and Illinois, and is a graduate of Calvin University in Grand Rapids, Michigan. Along with Michael today, we're going to hear from Lucy Schrader, and she is the Deputy Civil Rights Administrator. Lucy joined the Arizona Department of Transportation Civil Rights Office in April of 2005. Her experience includes working knowledge of the DBE, Title VI, EEO, contract compliance, ADA, and 504 investigation programs. Lucy's work responsibilities include oversight of ADOT's non-discrimination programs as well as subrecipients, contractors, and grantees. ADOT's non-discrimination programs work to prevent discrimination in employment, public access, benefits, participation, treatment, services, contracting, and training opportunities, allocation of funds, prioritization of project development, design, right-of-way acquisition, construction, research, and investigation of complaints. So please welcome Michael and Lucy. And you can go ahead, Lucy.
Okay, and I can advance my own slides, right?
Yes.
Yes, using the arrows at the bottom.
Okay. Well, and really, in all, it is going to be Mike who's going to be giving you the presentation about where we are in ADOT's pilot program. I'm really responsible for Civil Rights Office, coordination of the agency compliance with Title II of the ADA. We process the accommodations and modification requests, whether they be employees or from the general public. We investigate complaints, and then we review ADA policies. The infrastructure delivery and operations section, which is where Mike is from, implements the ADA transition plan. But I can tell you that as a civil rights professional, I learned early on that forming partnerships and identifying champions within the organization is really the only way to move these civil rights programs forward. When I first met Mike was working in the engineering consultant section. In working with the Title VI program, we were preparing for a Federal Highway Administration review of our program. So we were working on contract language. Mike became a champion, and he was, lucky for him, identified as one of the people that would be interviewed during our review. So soon after, and as a result of the FHWA review of the Title VI program, FHWA came in and they conducted training, and of course Mike was selected as a participant as he was a liaison for the Title VI program. So sure enough, when I saw that Mike moved to the area where he is now, I reached out to him and I said, hey Mike, guess what? I have the ADA program that's under me, and Roadway Engineering has input on the ADA transition plan, or responsibility over the transition plan. So if we coordinate, we can talk about how we can advance these programs. And I can tell you that I feel personally that Mike is probably one of the few engineers in ADOT who understands and sees the importance of ensuring compliance with the ADA and ensuring compliance with the ADA transition plan. I feel that his input has a lot to do with where we are in obtaining any type of designated funding for the ADA program. Again, I think that identifying champions, in which is one of the reasons I asked Mike to come in and provide the actual presentation on where the agency is headed with our pilot program. And with that, I give you Mike Tenblaker.
Thank you, Lucy. I'd like to just extend a warm greeting from Arizona. It's still morning here, so good morning to those on the west side of the United States, and good afternoon to folks east of here. ADOT's transition plan was adopted in 2012, December of 2012. Like many of you, documentation in your transition plans, this one defines our policies, our guidelines, and standards that we will follow. It defines our compliance and reporting requirements with FHWA. It defines the requirements for project documentation, which is a significant amount of our work. And it defines our implementation strategies for our department. Two strategies were defined in that document. The first one is our program project approach, which focuses on addressing ADA features on projects that are programmed in our transportation program and plan. The second is our sub-program approach. These are for non-project, non-program projects. It would be for a line item in our budget that would set aside funds in our program to address ADA features. A couple of key policy statements and standards, though, that are also defined in this document are what standards in the ADA that we follow. So ADOT's design standards for roadway projects, the U.S. Department of Transportation's ADA standards for transportation facilities, the 2006 version, which is based on ADA. All new or updated features are to be designed in compliance with these standards. The proposed accessibility guidelines for pedestrian facilities and public right-of-way, 2011, also known as PROAG, is not a standard, but should be considered for use when practical. And these are the standards that our engineers use through their evaluation and design. Like I said earlier, 2 methods of implementation were recommended. And how do we address ADA features? And that's documented in transition plans. First was inclusion of capital improvement program projects. Here were capital improvement projects that include ADA barriers meet the definition of alteration or new construction. Project completion must address all ADA improvements as part of the project. Second is inclusion of the budget line item or subprogram. Here is where the department applies an annual budget line item for ADA barrier removal projects in the future. These would be ADA-focused improvement projects that would not otherwise be improved through ADOT's 5-year program or associated with any project. Here we'd be funding ADA compliance improvements based on the highest priority. So our initial steps were focusing on our program projects. ADOT's initial implementation strategy was to address all ADA improvements as part of a program project. ADOT's project manager and technical teams would review and evaluate the project area for ADA barriers. Like I said earlier, where capital improvement projects met the definition of alteration or new construction, the project completion must address all ADA improvements as routine part of the project. Our typical approach here was focusing our attention on right-of-way to right-of-way and milepost to milepost within the project, and focusing on what was technically feasible. The challenges, though, that we are facing in this implementation strategy is that project budget and scope limitations exist. How far outside of the work areas did we have to investigate and do work on was one of the main questions we would spend time on. And like many of you in the States, limited project funding exists, and we had challenges in addressing features based on this approach. It did not address prioritized ADA improvements not associated with a program capital improvement project. So how do we address features in parts of the state, especially rural areas, that do not have projects programmed both now and in the near future? With these challenges, we knew we needed to rethink our approach while staying within the guidance of our transition plan. We needed to continue to address features within our project limits and look at the means to address our prioritized needs around the state. 2 strategies existed. One was a project-based approach, and the second was a budget line item. So here is where capital improvement projects meet the definition of alteration or new construction. The project completion shall address all ADA features and barriers within the project work limits of the alteration or new construction. Here we've refocused our attention on the projects where we will continue to address features associated with projects, but within a better defined scope. As I shared earlier, we had our envelope, our area of interest was milepost to milepost and right-of-way to right-of-way. Now our attention is focused on the actual work limits. While we're still focusing on projects, ADOT is establishing a programmed line item in our 5-year STIP to scope and fund prioritized non-project ADA features in the state of Arizona. And that subprogram line item is now called the ADA Compliance Subprogram. With a subprogram annually, and our fiscal year begins in July, ADOT's ADA coordinator will update ADOT's annual supplemental report to document ADA features and barriers reconstructed and redesigned in the previous FY or fiscal year. Annual supplemental reports will document non-compliant features for the self-evaluation report, and ADOT's ADA coordinator will update ADOT's prioritization inventory of remaining features on that list. ADOT's ADA coordinator and roadway ADA subprogram manager will evaluate past fiscal year performance on department's completed construction design work on non-compliant features, and evaluate the current fiscal year STIP to determine which program projects will include feasibility studies and ADA features to improve. Again, that's project focused. The ADA subprogram compliance projects will be then established with a defined scope of work and funding will be as approved and authorized through the subprogram. This will be based on our prioritized needs and practical delivery method. From the ADA compliance subprogram, that will be the source of funds for these types of projects. Our roadway ADA subprogram manager will prepare a feasibility study to document the scope of work that will be addressed, that will address the ADA features that were proposed to be updated as part of that fiscal year subprogram project. Design and advertisement of those ADA compliance projects would then proceed Construction will occur, and then as-built verification, primarily the documentation and reporting, will be done. So with this dedicated funding that we have, what can we use the money for? As I said before, it will be projects identified, scoped, and developed under the sub-program administration through the prioritization plans. If approved by the ADA compliant sub-program manager, though, the sub-program funds may be used to supplement project funding already associated with a program project to address improvements outside the limits of the work and that are included in our transition plan and our prioritization plan. It will be used to perform feasibility studies associated with sub-program ADA compliance projects. One caveat, though, is that per the infeasibility guidance, no new right-of-way would be acquired utilizing this money for the purpose of addressing the compliance features. So what have we done to date? Last year we did have monies associated with the sub-program that we were able to establish. ADOT designed and advertised one project encompassing 105 ADA features. That was our initial task and phase. The work was focused in our Southwest District, so that's primarily the Yuma area and the areas around it. That sub-program line item amount was $2 million. The contract procurement method that we used for delivering this was our indefinite delivery, indefinite quantity procurement method. This is a special experiment project number 14 or SEP 14, which did require FHWA approval and coordination. The contract was awarded earlier this summer. We are focusing now on our task 2 or phase 2 of that prioritization. Again, based on the contract we have with the contractor, that work will remain in the Southwest District regionally, focusing on the rural areas within the state of Arizona. As we have now entered fiscal 21, the sub-program amount, which was just recently approved, was $1 million. I had tentative on there, but as of yesterday, that program amount was approved by the State Transportation Board. That amount is annual, $1 million for the next 5 years. Fiscal year 21 sub-program prioritization and project definitions are underway. And with that, that concludes this presentation. I'm open for questions.
Thank you, Lucy and Michael. Participants, feel free to put some questions in the chat pod. I've got a question for Michael, and then we're gonna open it up for everybody. So I know that you have been approaching this with in a lot of different ways, but what method of funding do you feel like you're getting the biggest bang for your buck?
It's a very good question, especially given the financial situation most states are in, as well as Arizona. Historically, our attention has been on projects where the money is definitely focused on. We're able to utilize those project funds that are dedicated for that project to tap in and address the ADA features. I do believe, though, that this sub-program line item does give us flexibility, though, to expand. And based on our initial pilot project that we have now advertised and has been kicked off, I believe this is a very effective way of especially hitting these rural areas where not a lot of project attention is based on.
Thank you, Michael. So we're going to open it up to Anna and Lucy and Michael now. And can any of you speak to whether or not you have determined what percentage of your transportation budget is spent on removing barriers to improve accessibility?
Melissa, this is Anna. I saw that question come in from Jody. And Jody, we have not done that, but I think it's an excellent question. So I'm actually writing that down. We do monthly meetings with our ADA. We have regional representatives. So every region in CDOT meets once a month with us, and we have someone from our accounting office and business office. So every month we try to do kind of a status update of where we're at with funding and everything. So I'm actually going to bring that up at our next meeting next week because I think that's a great question to ask and good to get our finger on that pulse. So I'm so glad you asked that question.
Has Arizona made any attempt to try to quantify this as a percent of your overall budget?
This is Mike from Arizona. I do not have that number, but like Colorado, I've written that down. This will be with the sub-program money that are specifically set aside for ADA features. Obviously, that'll be easy to track. What we haven't, I do not have at my fingertips is based on a project by project basis, which is how we've been addressing our ADA features, what percentage. In some cases, that's very small, depending on the scope of the work. Sometimes it's a little bit larger.
Okay, thank you.
Have that number.
That's a big question to try to answer. So, Anna, can you tell us more about how you've expedited, Colorado has expedited the right-of-way acquisition process?
Yeah, I can give a little bit of information on that, but I also was going to say, when you guys post this, I'm happy to send out, we have kind of a pamphlet or a flyer that describes it. So I think Gail is who asked that question. And Gail, you can email me and I can send you kind of a summary of it. But if there's a way to post it too, or get it out to more folks that are interested in that. But it's definitely helped us to be able to just use an exhibit for that versus the full survey, and it's really reduced cost. Our approval time has also gone up. We've also looked at different elements as it relates to pricing with right-of-way and saw some good success. We piloted a pricing program where we were able to talk to different property owners and see if we could kind of negotiate pricing in a little bit different way. And I don't want to say it incorrectly because I'm absolutely not an expert in right-of-way, so I know just enough to be dangerous on this topic. But Gail, what I can do is I can send to you the summary of the updated program, and then I can get you in touch with our right-of-way team at CDOT for any follow-up questions that you may have. But also, Melissa, I can work with you too, so that if whenever this does get posted with FHWA, we can potentially have that as a support document or an additional blurb of information for anyone that's interested.
Okay, that would be great. I think that's an interesting thing for a lot of agencies. Can Arizona provide their tracking process where you ensure, excuse me, ADA compliance was attained on your construction features and how you prioritize ADA improvements for locations that still need to be addressed?
So through our contract procurement process that we've entered into, it's the indefinite quantity or indefinite quality procurement process, we do have, as part of our requirements for our contractors, a certification afterwards, detailed as-built to make sure that they were compliant and that our resident engineer signs off on that. That information then is transferred over to the engineers as well as to our ADA compliance team to make sure that that's updated into our feature inventory system, where that's our primary clearinghouse for all data associated with not just our ADA features, but other features around the state. That's then utilized with regards to our review of past year performance, as well as our prioritization, our reprioritization for the upcoming fiscal years as we look at the next round. I hope that addresses that. I did want to just add, I saw an email from Mike a chat from Mike regarding the $2 million for the 105 curbs. The estimate, the bid that came in was actually around $500,000 for those 105 curbs. It did include some additional flat work for sidewalk approaches and curb work as well. The $2 million is what was programmed, so that's our available sub-program money. So our first task, it's kind of a task order contract, was to complete the 105 elements. We will be then, as soon as that work is done, is focusing our attention on that task 2 or phase 2 within that contract, as we look at spending the balance of those funds. Like I said, we have $1 million this year in this fiscal year. That'll be our second IDIQ contract, and it'll be likely based on a different
Thank you,
region
Michael.
within the state.
And I've one more question, and then we're going to go to just chat questions. Anna, can you tell us how difficult it was for federal highway approval process for the IDIQ process? All right.
So for our design build, it's not an IDIQ, it's actually a design build. We looked at IDIQ as a potential contracting model. And we actually, at that time, our bike and ped engineer had a lot of experience doing engineering with the Air Force Academy in Colorado, and had utilized IDIQ before. And we had conversations with our contracts department, and really determined that IDIQ was potentially not the right alternative delivery method. And so what we're attempting to use is the design build, and it's very much at the beginning stages of it. So we have, I believe, done the solicitation, and it's a $10 million project, but we have not gotten to the build portion yet. So I think it would be great. I also spend the chat from other states that have done some design build alternative delivery ADA, so I may reach out afterwards and ping some folks here. But we ended up doing design build versus IDIQ, even though we looked into IDIQ.
Okay. Real quickly, Michael, can you tell us how difficult it was to get the IDIQ process approved through Federal Highway?
In simple terms, it was not difficult. It did require a lot of discussion and iteration of some of the IDIQ agreements with the FHWA. But overall, great partnership with our Arizona Division Office. They're very supportive of this approach. This is our first approach using this type of contract. So there was a lot of homework that we had to do. But between our contract team, our FHWA Division Office, our designers, and so forth, to date it's been successful. Obviously, the reporting as we move forward with the Set 14 agreements with our Division Office is going to be part of our work. But we're pretty optimistic on the direction it's been going so far.
This has been a great discussion, and thank you all for participating. The webinar has been recorded and will be posted in the future. And special thanks to our speakers, Cheryl Walker, Anna Mariotti, Michael Denblaker, and Lucy Strader, and to our partners, Ashto Areni-Rico, the Civil Rights Community. Make sure you register for our next webinar on December 2nd. And the topic will be Innovations in Technology for Transition Plan Implementation. Before everyone signs off, we are going to continue our Q&A in the chat pod only. So we thank you again. Feel free to enter your questions, and we'll presenters we'll try to answer them as they come in. And thank you again, and enjoy the rest of your day.